Hello everyone. Welcome to Avocado Sprint 51 release meeting. We'll go over the features that will make release 51, and after that we'll go through the planning phase, which will go through the items that will make release 52. Release 52 is supposed to be quite a special release. It's our second LTS, long-term stability release. So you should pay attention to what's coming in on this release, because that's going to be the last bunch of new features that will end up on the next LTS release. Release 52, it's going to be what we call LTS beta. So we'll be only looking at documentation updates, bug fixes, making sure the release is really sound and stable. So let's start with what happened on release 51. So going from bottom to top, we have fixed a bug in Avocado VT. The bug is about configuration file values from the Avocado level actually interfering with settings on the Cartesian configuration file. Basically, you would always get 1 GB of memory because that is set in the vt.conf file. And if you had configurations, say on guest OS, Fedora, something, those would not actually be applied. So we have fixed that. The next one is job data, which is now stored as plain data and not as data and code. We used to have a P-code version of a class that implemented, this was the way we implemented serialization. We understood that we would be much better if we just stored data. And Lukasz has worked on this, and he's going to demo the differences now.
Yep, hello. So basically, you probably know this feature, but when you run a job, for example, let's say pass test, fail test with a couple of variants, not just the results are stored, but also the conditions under which the job ran. So let's have a look at them. There is the job data directory. And you can see that there are files like arguments, command line, config, pvd, URLs, test references, and variants JSON. Basically, these files contain usually machine-readable representation of the job. For example, the pvd means the directory from which I run this job, because test references could be relative to this path. Until now, like in previous release, we used to have this multiplex file, or the variants file, which was a Python pickled file, which is obviously not really human readable. And nor is it actually readable when you change the data, because Python pickle basically stores a class name as well as the data for that class, and it loads it by using the code from the current version, which does not always work. So instead of this, we now store JSON representation of the variant, which is obviously not what I provided, because you can see that I provided this examples moox0, which is this nice file with no values at all. So basically what we do is, instead of storing the actual each plugin's data, we just store the dump of what's to become the Avocado params. The benefit of this is that between versions we can easily prepare for this change and be able to load like a different version of of those results. So when we in the future introduce a new loader, we will still be able to load it because we don't just use the class, we load the data. And the second benefit is that, well, for example, replaying a job, you don't have to have the plugins which were used to produce the variants. So basically, what's it all good for? It's Avocado run replay and either replay, where is it? This hash, partial hash is fine. And you can see that it runs the same files, the same test, but now. Or I can use Avocado diff to see what are the differences between those two jobs, for example, and there should be none. Obviously there are. The command line actually changed. So you can see that there are pretty neat information in these machine readable files. Okay, I hope it's well understood. Feel free to ask for details.
Yeah, basically it should greatly improve compatibility between versions. So you have jobs saved on previous versions of Avocado. They should be much more stable to be reused on newer versions.
Yeah. By the way, regarding to that, currently we do not really test how well we work on this. I mean, probably when you run a job in 50 in Avocado release 50, you should be able to replay it in 51 or 50, maybe in 52. But we do not really check. We do have a card to start working on this. So basically, we only check whether something changes when we touch the job data code, and we do it manually. So right now I verify that it works with the previous release. I don't remember whether it worked with the 36 LTS. I seriously doubt that it works.
Right. So the card you're talking about is probably this one.
Yep.
About adding self-tests. Okay.
So basically, with this, when we introduce this card, we will know which versions are compatible, which should give you a nice opinion, like a nice view of what you can do and what you shouldn't.
Okay, wonderful. So next one is create a guideline for tagging tests. So there were a few things that went on this task. We suggested an informal guideline on the mailing list. It was well accepted. On Avocado itself, though, what happened here was that we included some documentation listing exactly how an Avocado docstring directive, which is the basis of a tag, can be composed of. So this is a list of the rules that actually make it up. These are built on top of regular expression. So if you really want to check if something adheres to our guideline for the format of docstring directives, you can use that. And also on Avocado MISC tests, we proposed some kind of guidelines, informal ones at this point, but you should be able to count on it. I think I can give a quick show just to. So on Avocado MISC tests, the README file basically shows that tests could be tagged like this. So CPU tests could have a tag with CPU, network tests could be tagged accordingly. And for users, it's kind of interesting. For instance, if you're willing to try tests that can run unprivileged, so basically you could I'm using dry run to not actually run the tests, but you could say something like, please run all the tests that are not privileged from a given directory. And they found 2 of them. So this is what happened on this card. And you can expect Avocado MISC tests itself to evolve its tagging and maybe in the future serve as a guideline for other test repos. Next one is inherit test methods from parents. Basically, because Avocado does static checking of Python source code files in search for instrumented tests, we have added a while back what we call Avocado enable and disable docstring directives. This was a partial solution to a problem, and let me actually show with a proper example how that is better solved now. So basically, when we have a Python instrumented test, if it does not inherit directly from Avocado test, the Avocado loader, and that is visible either on the list command or on the run command, it will not see an Avocado instrumented test. The partial solution we have had for a while is the use of Avocado enable. This basically tells the loader that while it does not actually inherit directly from Avocado test, it is an Avocado instrumented test. So this is something you can run. But there is a problem here because you may want to have a base class or multiple levels of inheritance. And if you don't, if you actually have your structure like that, I'll just. Hello, Lucas. I've just muted yourself, but feel free to unmute yourself. So back to the demo. We have introduced Avocado enable. So, and this lets you list the tests as I've shown before. But if you have a base class, in this case, I'm using past test, which is a known test from example, you do not actually see the tests that come from that class. The solution we have on release 51 is to activate recursive method with docstring directive with the same name. And what happens here is that you're going to see the test methods that come from the base classes all the way to Avocado test. So if you have 1, 2, 3, or 5, or whatever the number of inherited classes in the middle, you're going to be able to see those. We have discussed on the mailing list that we see this as a temporary solution, and because users are actually used to have Avocado enable, we decided for release 51 to actually keep this behavior. That is, we would require Avocado enable or Avocado recursive. But for newer releases after LTS probably, we will probably deprecate this tag and mimic the way Python actually works by default. So expect to have a more, now that the introspection, the static introspection works, expect to have more standard user experience on newer versions. We have a few messages. Okay, so Lucas was watching. Nice.
By the way, about that, it's closer to how unit tests or standard Python modules works. I mean, the dynamic loader, which basically executes the class, and then it looks for test methods. But still,
exactly.
you can't define dynamically created test methods, which is available in unit tests. For example, in init, you can, for Python unit test, you can create a test method which will be executed, but you can't do it in Avocado because obviously we are not executing the code. So this is only about the statically created methods in parent classes.
Exactly. Okay, nice. So the next one was an investigation that actually came from proof of concept about a new varianter implementation. Um, we have discussed why and why not it's necessary to provide MOOCs a tree node as part of the varianter and the role of path. Some discussion has been going on here, some discussion on GitHub. So this just marks that we have investigated and we are discussing that issue. We have an ongoing, we have been for a few years, I would say, 1 or 2 years, including Python 3 support. We recently got an issue open on GitHub about how come Avocado does not support Python 3. Yeah, we know. The thing is, a few releases back, we still had to support 2.6, so that was a higher priority. Now we've dropped Python 2.6 support, and we're really looking for Python 3. This pull request that was merged, it actually allows Avocado as a command to run. It loads some plugins, but it's not capable of listing and running tests at this point. Basically, it looks like Unicode issues are at the core of most of the functionality that we lack to have a proper Python 3 support, but we got some movement going on there. And the issue is still open because we really want to pursue that. During this release, we have had an implementation of another proof of concept, of one proof of concept for another implementation for the varianter. Basically, we started discussing something called combinatorial independent testing and something called pairwise or all pairs support. I looked into a Microsoft project called Pict, which actually creates variants. The idea is that on pairwise, that is two-way combinations, you would make sure that at least a unique pair of individual values, so Windows and RHEL 6 would exist at least in one variant. And any other values here would also exist at least once. So we ended up creating proof of concept that relies on the generation of variants by using the Pict tools. And there's been some discussion here. I did not prepare a demo, but it's quite functional. And you guys are invited to try it out. Basically, there are 2 points here. For some use cases, it feels simpler to actually define the values that you want. You can increase the number of combinations from two-way all the way to the maximum number of values, which would give you a similar result to the current varianter. So our current varianter generates every single possible combination. But there's also another side on this, which is to possibly enable people that are using Pict to actually run their tests on Avocado without having to rewrite config files. Besides that, Amador has had some conversation with some researchers who are looking into implementing this same kind of features, independent combinatorial testing into the Avocado varianter, like into the base Avocado varianter implementation.
So, do they have a language to restrict certain combinations?
You mean the Microsoft base version or the one the researchers are talking about?
It's a language similar to what we have in both the YAML based and the original Cartesian file, the no's and onlys.
Actually, I'm not aware of the specific format they are using. Amador was there last week, and maybe he can comment on that. Are you You there, Amador? I'm not sure if they demoed.
By the way, if I understood correctly the question, you're asking about how this is limiting the number of variants. Are you?
Well, I'm asking if there is a way to restrict or limit, because this obviously looks good in principle, but it seems to be missing some features. Said features are the ability to restrict the matrix generated by the combination.
Right.
Basically, if I remember correctly, what Amador was saying, they are looking for, like, they are currently studying of a varianter, our variant. I mean the Yamoto MOOCs, because it actually creates tree, which it by itself creates some filters. But obviously, picked only uses flat list of arguments, so you would really need some filter only, filter out, etc. to be compatible with us. But they will try to incorporate it, if I understood correctly.
Nice.
And as for us, I really like the concept of like getting some combination, like the minimum number of combination. And I actually suggested that we may actually combine the varianter with this picked library just to filter or compress the number of variants. Because what we actually can do, we can make a varianter to produce this flattened list of variants and feed this to the picked, let picked to filter out the resulting variants, and then feed it feed it to test if it's understandable.
Maybe.
So that would be actually ultimate combination for me.
Yep. And it's nice to be part of a larger project that has more people using it. I like the idea of this moving forward.
Yeah. And if you take a quick look at the PIX documentation, there's some even extended documentation hosted at MSDN and other websites that I found. But the basic documentation talks about how you can put constraints, conditionals, a lot of things. So the example that I actually posted, it's pretty simple. But yeah, you can do things like this. If something, then I want to set something. Or I've seen aliases as well. So yes, the language, yeah, aliases, negative testing. So yeah, the language is a bit more expressive than just like keys and possible values. So yeah, hopefully this will turn out into something interesting enough.
So, sorry for getting back to a previously discussed subject, but in the doc strings to discover tests, so this new tag recursive was proposed. I would assume that there is a work item to study the possibility of getting rid of the docstring tags completely.
Actually, we did discuss that, but we have not actually turned that into a card. That is something that we should have done, and it's good that you just reminded us of that. So yeah, get rid of.
Yeah, because it's a passable solution, but moving forward, I would imagine that we want to get rid of it and have a more natural behavior that doesn't involve, modifying the doc strings to get to a certain result. Probably we will have to do some more advanced static checking, or using the AS3 module. But yeah, eventually it would be interesting to completely get rid of that.
Yeah, we have talked about, but we failed to actually create a work item. So yeah, thanks for reminding.
By the way, one cons for that is that right now you can run, like, for example, /tmp to or some directory to search for Avocado tests, and without this tag, it will be quite intensive or hard for Avocado to to discover the tests, because it would have to, for each class found in each Python file, it would have to look for all parents. I mean, we are talking about static analysis, not about dynamic looking at the parents. So yeah, we will need to look closer whether it's actually good
Yeah,
thing.
sure. I'm
But
not
it
saying
shouldn't
I'm
be
not
that
saying
hard.
it's going to be trivial or that it's going to, it might use way too much CPU for it to be practical. But since we have tools such as Pylint, looking at the code and making static analysis, maybe it's doable in a reasonable amount of time, in a reasonable amount of CPU.
Well, it is actually doable. It's really simple. You just switch the default. The thing is whether we do want to do it. So we will have to investigate that. And I think it shouldn't be that hard. So, but
Yeah, I
just
mean,
saying my question.
yeah, this is something we will look into more details in the next releases, but that's how we're possibly heading. Like, we have a common understanding that we want to give users the more natural user experience that they're used to get from just about any other Python related tool. Okay, next one is add a way to run full suite per variance instead of all variants for each test. The card actually shows it what we intended here, but Lukash can actually give a demo of this.
Yep, me again. So basically, you already saw this example a few minutes ago. And as you can see that by default, Avocado first run all variants of the first test and then all variants of the second test. But we were asked by people, why don't we allow like first circle through tests and on the first variant and then the second variant? So here we go. There is a new execution order option. So far, it supports the options test per variant or variants per test. And basically, if you execute it this way, you can see a slightly different result: green, green, red, red, and there now it's green, red, which means first we used first variant and then second. And in here you can see first variant and then the second variant. So, but it's pretty simple, minor thing, but it could be useful. And the motivation for this was, for example, that in virtualization, you may want to create, for example, host with variant with the features defined in variant 1. And you may not want to reload the test or like shut down and start it again in the next test. So this is more friendly for such situation.
Exactly. So just like using the example we have here, you want to run all the IDE tests first, and then you want to run all the HCI tests later. So yes, it makes a lot of sense. And the nice thing is that those few features were added. I mean, that feature was added pretty close to this proof of concept, and I actually tried the generation of picked variants with that feature as well, and works as we would hope.
By the way, just before this meeting, I discovered that we do have a bug regarding this feature, but we'll take a look at it at the next sprint. Basically,
Okay.
the job data does not play nicely with execution order, so we just need to investigate it. So yeah, not everything works as we want.
Yeah, I mean that's why I said, oh, surprise, a new feature works with something else. So yeah, problems are actually expected with when we're moving like that. Okay, so next one is make YAML to MOOCs an optional plugin. So we have been working on abstracting the core variant generation mechanism for a while. And the last step, probably the last step towards really showing that we have a sound architecture and a base implementation was to split the YAML to MOOCs. out of core and make it an optional plugin. So starting on release 51, it's going to be a separate package. That means that core Avocado will not need PyYAML, and users are not really obliged to have the multiplexer, the varianter generation functionality. They can have one if they install this package, and just assuming that new implementations will come up, they could have that being generated from other implementations. Any words on that, Lukasz?
Yeah, by the way, one minor thing, if you are using if you install Avocado from sources by make install does not install optional plugins by default. There is no way to install them. So you need to actually go manually into optional plugins, see that we actually have quite a few of them, into variantor YAML to MOOCs, and from here you need to run Python setup py install from here to actually get YAML support on installed system. Or you can use it from RPM, or from it should be available on pip once this release is pushed. But don't forget to update your systems, because yeah, I did this mistake and suddenly I was confused why minus m is not supported.
So maybe it's a small detail, but you should look into renaming the new plugin YAML to variant instead of YAML to MOOCs, since it was recently renamed to varianter instead of MOOCser.
Well, it's variantor YAML to MOOCs plugin because it uses the MOOCs implementation, which is in core. So it's a variantor plugin, and but hard to say it's how to.
Yeah, so the
explain.
multiplexer is still, like the core libraries are still on core. We have defined an interface for variant generation plugins to implement. And this actually looks for YAML files and turns them into MOOCs trees, which are one implementation of varianter.
I see, yeah. So disregard my comment.
All right, next one is run teardown. Almost always when setup was executed, pull request v3 was merged. Basically, if we have any problems during setup, we do not guarantee the teardown was called. This was now fixed, so we have a more reliable and consistent implementation. The test is actually really cool, so we check the various conditions and make sure that teardown was called. I think Amador is without sound, so I'm not sure if he wants to comment anything here.
Just prepare your setups because teardowns, because teardown can be run even when setup did not finish properly. So do the allocation at the beginning of setup, and then you clean up everything in teardown. That's the only difference.
Check for what you're cleaning on teardown. Okay, next one is Avocado list command should optionally show tags. So we have introduced tags as a way to basically tag, categorize tests a while back. And until now, users would have to look at the Python source code files to actually see the tags. We thought it would make sense to list them along the test type and name. This is now implemented, so users can say Avocado list verbose. They will get a count they will get the listing of tags, and they would also get a summary of tags, just as there's a summary of tag counts for test types. So pretty simple stuff, but pretty handy. Add make requirement plugins. So this is kind of a developer-only oriented task. Basically, we have added a rule, a makefile rule that will install the requirements of plugins if they happen to live in the same base directory as Avocado. So the same way we go recursive through plugins on make link, we would do this on make requirement plugins. It looks for either make files or requirements.txt and installs them. I noticed that we were not publishing PDF and EPUB files on your documentation. We have now fixed that, and you should be able to get either PDF or EPUB. And it's actually interesting that the docs are pretty long. Even the manual part of the documentation, like the non-automatic generated ones, are pretty extensive.
Yeah, although the necessity for PDF and EPUB is kind of arguable, like I'm not sure if in this day and age people just sit and read a PDF. It's more, the much more common use case is to go to the website because it's better, more interactive.
Yeah, it was like the trade-off was just like to have another checkbox enabled, and like of course we're using more CPU and resources from read the docs, but
Yeah, it's negligible.
okay, yeah, it's negligible. So if people want that, and I just thought it was interesting because it gave us a count of the amount of documentation we have produced. So I think it's close to 100 pages of manual documentation.
Yep.
So we almost have a book there.
Let's give ourselves the high five.
Yeah. Okay, guys. So next one is also a minor thing. Our spec file, which is supposed to be in sync with downstream files, now have indentation on the various conditionals. Pretty minor, but we got that done. Next one is that we have enabled Avocado Test Runner to be lenient with missing test references. Basically, this was a request from users. We added an option called ignore missing test references. I had not prepared a demo, but I think I can really show pretty quickly how that works. So basically, if we say list include tests, list non-existing, it would run. It would of course fail, but if we do add ignore missing references, what did I do wrong?
Unit, yes.
Ignore.
Yes
Oh yeah.
no.
On or off actually. Unable to resolve. Oh, you should just use something like.
Yeah, you need at least one test to be valid.
So non-existing was not found, but the job still actually kept running with the one test reference that was found, which is pass test. So this is, of course, behavior that is different from the default, which would abort the test if one test reference does not actually resolve into a valid test. Back to the Trello board. VT Bootstrap also create a host architecture information. This is an Avocado VT task. Basically, we are creating during Bootstrap yet another configuration file. It can be based on auto detection of the host configuration, basically the distro, the architecture. And this is actually to accommodate some internal needs we had and make more of our configuration upstream. So this is a related card. That one was about architecture, and this one was about it was about the various distros versions. So yeah, all about the same two cards for the same task. Next one is display loader failures in Avocado list verbose. So Lukash has worked on this. Any comments here, Lukash?
Not really. It's quite old, Karen. To be honest, I forgot how it works. But basically, I improved the verbosity of failures because avocado list is actually the only way to discover why a given test is not found. So in case it's not found, it's not discovered, I do list more errors in basically each loader plugin to actually know why it's not a boot test, why it's not a VT test, why it's not a robust test, etc. It was a bit controversial at first, but if I remember correctly, it was merged in the way it's mentioned in the card, right?
Yeah.
Yep. So
I actually started another discussion about maybe moving this information elsewhere because we're listing a test, and this is actually not a test. But yeah, this is how
basically
it
this
currently
is the
is.
controversial part. Basically, what I like about this is that you see that that it was discovered as boot, but it was also not discovered as boot for VT loader, and it was not discovered as boot for robot. And the reason. So I like the order because when you discover like 20 tests, then it actually makes sense to have it ordered. Because before, some tests just printed the errors before this listing, which actually can be quite confusing in case you are discovering multiple tests. So yeah, opinions are welcome.
Nice debugging info at the very least. So yeah, this looks good.
I think this was related as well. Remove test types, they're not really test types. Lukash worked, if I remember correctly, about the same time.
Basically,
we had,
instead of inheriting from avocado test, I now inherit from simple object because we do not actually list those in execution. We only list them in during listing, and during listing they don't need to be actual tests, right? You don't need additional functions.
Exactly. Okay. Avocado VT. Let me see if I skipped any. No, that's it. Avocado VT experiment on functional tests. So again, this is an Avocado VT task. And we have added basically some functional tests. There is a bootstrap that happens there. We add a test to the test provider location, make sure the test that was added is there. So yeah, we increased the functional coverage on Avocado VT. This was pretty much internal for developers, so make clean did not use to clean optional plugin eggs. So this was mostly apparent when you switched versions or installed different, like we're developing different branches, so you would have conflicting plugin registered because of the presence of the eggs. This was also extended to remove the LTS eggs because they actually name a different module name. So yeah, it makes the make clean, make develop process work better. Make Avocado test and Avocado app loggers available in a standardized way. This was a pretty nice change because it adds a lot of consistency. Basically, we have log UI and log job defined at Avocado core output. So a lot of code used to do import logging, and it's now just using the log that is defined once. So we are replacing log instances that are generated on various files just for these more standard log UI and job log. Log UI is, of course, related to avocado.app, and log job is related to avocado.test. So it adds a lot of
more of an organizational change because the classes themselves they are singletons, right?
Yeah, we have talked about making that. We have talked about making those kind of supported interfaces for plugin writers, so that they would be able to depend on this. The fact is, we are still not publishing a stable interface for plugin writers, so we left that alone for now.
Yeah, basically the intention for this, at least for me, was that I would like to work on the loggers. For example, for running tests in parallel, it does not scale currently. But with this interface, we should be able to replace this with anything we want, and still
So
having
abstraction is
it
great.
available in one location. So that was the motivation.
Yep, looks great.
This is something that may impact users of the web service that we host, but the file service that we host, we did not actually let people know about the contents of the repos and the static servers. We are now listing
I thought that was
files.
by design.
It was by limitation, actually. It's still not perfect, but people can at least see what's in there at this point.
Yeah,
Nice.
when people miss like Fedora 22 version of Avocado 51, then they can see why.
Yeah. And finally, we have filed a bug upstream on libvirt-python. It actually resulted in a fix getting merged pretty quickly. Basically, we still have a workaround that we have to keep until libvirt-python is really out there, and not only, of course, the fix is not only limited to Git. But we still carry a workaround that actually disable libvirt-python as a requirement, because libvirt-python did not use to publish egg information. They used to remove that. So even if the package was installed, we would not be able to tell that. So in a while, we have to reevaluate the workaround that we have. So yes, this is what happened for release 51. There are a few tasks still on work in progress for 51, which now is going to become 52. Basically, Lukács is working on the self-tests we mentioned before for legacy job data, so making sure that previous versions of the data work with newer versions, and possibly the opposite as well. Andre has contributed. He has worked actually on a plugin for Beaker. So users running Avocado, something would get the test results actually published directly on Beaker as well. The task here is to actually get the code that he wrote and actually propose it upstream as another plugin. I have been working on this task, which includes cleaning up some configuration files, merging some internal configurations which you cannot get rid of. You have in a real world usage of Avocado and Avocado VT, you usually have links to like file servers, repositories where you hold images, ISO files, things like that. So it makes sense to actually be able to allow users to have multiple configuration repos. I've been working on this for a while, but the upstream changes, although there has been some changes to the bootstrap and some other related fixes, the full feature here has not yet been proposed upstream. Basically, the idea is to let users say, oh, by the way, use this test provider and also use these other internal or external, whatever configuration repos to be merged into the Cartesian config files. Last one is RFC, multiple machine support for tests. I'm currently working on V2 together with a proof of concept. I do not publish anything on this sprint, but I'll be getting back to work on this on the next one. So this is the end of the review. of 51, we already have the new release being named. So LTS beta is going to be called Pat and Matt. Lukash can probably give some information on that later. Probably there's going to be a Sprint team card there for the curious ones. But we can quickly go. First, let me open to questions. If there are any questions about the status of 51, then we can jump into what we are planning to do for 52. Any questions here?
About the stabilization for the new LTS version. So is what's on 51 going to be used as final feature source, or is 52 being used in terms of features?
Yeah, so we are not adding any new features to 52. So all the features on 51 is what you get on the next LTS version. We're, of course, going to take a look at the individual cards, but just by a quick glance, you can see that we only have documentation, experimentations, that kind of cards on the upcoming sprint. Since we already talking about that, we also have, as a kind of special circumstance, we have a bunch of Avocado vert tasks. We intend to get Avocado vert going, like moving forward again. And the idea is that since we are not going to introduce new features on Avocado proper, we can, if we have time, we can work on Avocado vert. So we have moved all the Avocado vert related cards to the sprint backlog. It does not mean we aim to get them all done, but we'll treat them especially during this sprint. Okay, so let's just like really quickly, we have a bunch of cards to document how LTS Next compared to the old 36 LTS, basically to let users prepare for an upgrade. And of course, how to switch from 36 LTS to LTS Next, which is going to be 52. We have a bunch of cards regarding documentation. So one is improved docs regarding test references. Did I skip one? Yeah. Internal changes such as move MOOC self-test from examples to self-test data and create a few examples. Document test process environment. Cleanup self-test. We notice we have a bunch of duplicate tests. In the functional ones are ones that actually hurt the make check time. Add review process documentation. I don't think we properly say how we actually review or should review contributions. Fix add the job pre-documentation. Looks like it's either outdated or needs some more coverage. Describe how to use Avocado Remoter. So we have moved Avocado Remoter to an external plugin, and we have some users of run that actually can receive a run function that could make use of remote to run code on a separate machine, on a remote machine. This is what we have on file, but the general trend of the next sprint is going to be to try out Avocado in ways that we have not tested for a while. So expect new tests. So Lukash just mentioned execution order with the new job data does not work properly. So we're going to do a bunch of exercises on that front to make sure all features work with other features. Try to find as many bugs as possible and try to fix them for sprint 52. Initially, we're going to try to have a shorter time-wise sprint. So we are expecting to meet again in 2 weeks, but we will evaluate that on the next week to see if we have things in shape. So expect either a 2 or 3 week sprint for 52. Any questions? special requests, even though we are on feature freeze at this point. Yeah.
I'll have a lot of. I'll probably have to help the ScyllaDB friends to port their tests to this new LTS version. They're very wary of changing stuff that's already working.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's see.
I mean, they have 6 months window, so I believe it won't be that hard. And there were not many changes, right? Okay.
Yeah. Well, since I started, since I developed their tests, I did try to use some newer versions that were on the 40s range, and yeah, things were not working. Apparently, the multiplexer / varianter has changed a little bit in such ways that, but it should be easy fixes. I would imagine.
By the way, yeah, ideally, if you have time during this this 2 to 3 weeks to give it a try, not just port them all, but give it a try, you can let us know what does not work so we can document it in the LTS release.
Yeah. About, I guess one of the things that are worrying me the most is the lack of support of directly assessing the runner queue, because a lot of my hardcore cleanup procedures, they happen on that part, because we gotta clean up instances on cloud providers as much as you possibly can. Otherwise, you get your company charged in the end of the month, and the bill does not look good. So you must clean up stuff. And one of the discussions we had is that, I started using the runner queue, and it was very helpful for that, because as resources are being allocated, I allocate in the runner queue the functions necessary to clean those resources. So no matter, because when you're developing the test, you might introduce bugs without knowing, and then you run, and then the test fails because of your bug that you found, you introduced when you were developing, and now you have to clean up 50 instances, which is kind of not practical. So I added this as a convenience for the person developing the new test. But yeah, let's see if I can use the other mechanisms to clean those resources, to make sure that we're cleaning those resources, even if you introduce a bug in the test that you were developing.
Yeah, by the way, I don't remember correctly, but I think that func exit works still works.
Yeah, it still works. We just decided not to improve it, but we didn't drop the support. So.
Yeah, it is still supported because we don't have a better alternative yet. And one more thing, currently it should be easier if you release the resources after each test, then you can just use the teardown for it because it's guaranteed to be executed. Lucas, you're muted.
Yeah, I had to mute you, Lucas, but you can unmute yourself.
Sometimes you might introduce bugs in the setup procedure, so things can fail at any moment. Therefore, I try to be very paranoid. As soon as I allocate a resource, if I just introduce a new cleanup procedure in the queue. But if everything works fine, yeah, the normal cleanup procedures work, and then there's no issue. Everything is dandy fine. But when there are bugs, then you might find yourself, hey, okay, now I have to clean up these 50 instances manually, and that's certainly not good. But yeah, I need to take a look, and especially since I don't work for ScyllaDB anymore, I'll have to do it on my free time, which is kind of scarce now. But let's see.
Yeah, by
even
the way,
more for American, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course, you know.
By the way,
Sleep is for the weak.
Yeah, Lucas, by the way, you can still import the util, the func.exit util, and use it inside the test, because you can create another instance of func.exit, and actually you in setup create this func.exit class and use it in teardown to destroy everything. But we are talking about one test content. I understand that probably you may want to allocate the resource throughout the whole job, and then you have to use the run queue for that. And yes, I hope we will tackle that after the LTS release, because this is something I know I really want, and we need to find a proper way to do it, like the cleanup after tests. I mean, we had some proposals how to do it, so yeah, you just have to look at it.
One way that you may be able to actually work around that and maybe even simplify things. If you get to serialize and make sure that you save like a description of the resources that you're allocating during test, maybe you could rely on a post-job plugin that goes on those if the resources are allocated at the end. Should be deallocated at the end of the job.
Yeah, that was something that was mentioned, and it could be a reasonable way of doing that. We could even maybe create a shell script of sorts that, you know, as you're allocating resources, you're just adding lines to this shell script, and this shell script gets to be executed during job cleanup. Maybe that's a bad idea, but yeah, we need to see.
Yeah, one of the plugins that come by default with Avocado is the job dir, so you can actually just like point to a shell script there, and it would run after the job.
There you go.
Yeah. So yeah, we have gone through what's going to be sprint 52. So I guess that's the end of our agenda. If you guys have any other questions or comments, now is the time to do so. If not, I just I'd like to say thank you for joining for the very nice discussion, and hope to see you guys again in 2 or 3 weeks. So any questions or comments before I let you guys go? All right. Bye-bye, and thanks a lot.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
See you guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.